Cook Political Report, which is out with its top stories that defined 2024, including the shifting electoral map, the gender gap, and vulnerable incumbents this election cycle. To talk about it, let's bring in senior editor and elections analyst for the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter, Dave Wasserman. Dave, good to see you this morning. So let's start with some of the top lines here as you look back on the year that was, and in particular, as we teased before the break, the gender gap and some surprising developments.
That's right. And in fact, the gender gap was historically normal. And it looked as if we had around a 21 point gender gap in the exit poll, where Kamala Harris was winning women by about 10. Donald Trump was winning men by around 12. And yet that's in line more or less with the gender gap we saw in 2016. The bigger development of 2024, in my view, is what I would call the reversal of the partisan engagement gap. And it used to be in the Obama era that when more people voted, Democrats generally did better. You think about 08, 12, he ushered in millions of low propensity voters who were new participants to the process, who were disproportionately young and non-white. Well, in today's era, when more people vote, it's Donald Trump's party that does better, and specifically Donald Trump. And Democrats are doing well among the people who always turn out, whether it's in off years or special elections. And in fact, special elections leading into 2024 were not predictive of what we saw in this year's race. In fact, when millions of Americans who didn't vote in the midterms were added into the pool, it benefited Donald Trump in a lot of these key battleground states. And so even as Democrats have more money and are outspending Republicans at all levels, Republicans have the masses. And that is the new trend in our politics.
Yeah, dig into that a little bit more. These less informed, less engaged voters who break for Trump maybe don't come out in off-year elections. And does that play into the idea of why we saw some ticket splitting as well? Or, you know, the idea that in some of these battleground states, for instance, Michigan, Wisconsin, Arizona, Trump wins, but so did the Democratic Senate candidate.
Well, there you go. In Nevada, for example, there were 70,000 Trump voters who didn't bother voting for Sam Brown, the Republican Senate nominee. There were about 120,000 Trump voters in Michigan who didn't end up voting for Mike Rogers. And so Alyssa Slotkin wins that race. And the fact that Kamala Harris was able to keep this election close, which is not something I would say Joe Biden might have been able to do had he stayed in the race, means that Democrats are going to be sitting on 47 Senate seats rather than 43 Senate seats. So it did make a big difference.
Dave, talk about the House and how tight it was, because as we came out of the election night, it actually looked like the Republicans had done better in the House than they finally ended up doing. How surprised were you or not by the final House result?
You know, this is the one area where Democrats' money advantage really did make a big difference, because there were a lot of Republican candidates who got vastly outspent. Whereas even if Kamala Harris had a marginal advantage in the presidential spending in the battlegrounds, it was basically at a point of diminishing returns. It was complete saturation. So in the House, Democrats were able to pick up 3 seats each in California and New York. They fell short in races in Pennsylvania and Arizona and some of those battlegrounds where Republicans just narrowly were able to hang on to control of the House. But it gets back to Republicans' turmoil. They overthrew in October of 2023 their best recruiter and fundraiser in modern history in Kevin McCarthy. And Mike Johnson ended up being very politically green at those aspects of the speakership job. And it cost Republicans the opportunity to grow their majority at a time you saw a 6-point swing towards Trump between 2020 and 2024. And as a result, he's going to have just almost an ungovernable majority to navigate, considering that you have Elon Musk weighing in at the last minute on issues to an extent that you've never seen before.
The phrase House Republicans in turmoil basically acts as a bat signal to go back to Brendan Buck. So, Brendan, let's get you to weigh in on what Dave had to say there, that dynamic that we saw play out over the last few months, but also how it impacts things going forward, including, I'd argue, Speaker Johnson's ability to hang on to the gavel.
Yeah, certainly no sure thing that Mike Johnson actually is Speaker next Congress. Now, if I were to guess, I would assume that he gets through But a lot of unforced errors, obviously, in the last week with this government funding bill. I mean, it was his goal the entire time to have a no drama, lame duck session, just do a 3-month spending bill. And for whatever reason, he decided to add a bunch of stuff to it that got everybody's attention. Now, I will say this, though. I don't know that if Mike Johnson is Speaker or someone else, it matters a whole lot. I don't think the House Republicans' problem is the Speaker. I think House Republicans' problem is their unwillingness to accept some of the realities that come along with being in the majority. Funding the government, raising the debt ceiling, being able to accept anything that is actually achievable, and anything that is actually achievable being unacceptable to them. You could make Jim Jordan, the sort of arch conservative Speaker of the House. You could make Elon Musk Speaker of the House. He actually could be. And I don't think it would make much of a difference if they're not willing to accept certain realities. So Mike Johnson is now finds himself in the position of catching all of the flack, and he's not necessarily hasn't built up enough goodwill and sort of reputation to kind of take it on and brush it aside. So I think there's going to be a real challenge, and he may get through because there simply is no other alternative. And funny enough, that's actually what Mike Johnson's been saying. Anybody who can get 218 votes, good luck to them. And I sort of agree with that. It's not the Speaker's fault. It's those members. And as long as they refuse to accept realities, they're going to keep having to, face a leadership that they're looking to overthrow.
Such a sweet idea that he thought he could have a drama-free lame duck session before Trump actually took over. Dave, let's close with you. Now that you've been through all of the data and you've seen the things that surprised you and you didn't, the storylines that we got right and we didn't, how much have you learned in terms of 2028? As lessons for Democrats in 2028. We know they're all going through a big postmortem, lots of conversations about where they went wrong, where they need to be. Is there some risk that they kind of, end up in 2020, if they take too much from this election, end up fighting the last battle, and 2028 could look different again? I know particularly you've been looking at some of these tight House races and what would happen in districts that are more racially mixed than some others, and how actually 2028 may not be the same as 2024.
Yeah, the immediate autopsies after every election are usually worthless when it comes to what voters are going to be interested in 4 years down the line. Yeah. And the one lesson here is that authenticity is the most prized commodity in politics. And even if voters did view Trump as more extreme, they viewed Kamala Harris as canned. And Democrats have been running the same kind of teleprompter-based campaigns with textbook rallies in the 7 key swing states for years now. And even if voters abhor what Donald Trump is saying at times, they know Trump is being Trump. They didn't mind that he campaigned in states like New York and California. To them, that suggested that he wanted to be president for the entire country, even though he was never going to win those states. And at the House level, it's instructive that you did have 13 Democrats who were able to win in Trump districts, people ranging from Jared Golden in Maine, Marie Perez in Washington State, Don Davis in North Carolina. There are Democrats who were able to crack the code here. And even if voters viewed Kamala Harris as too liberal, they did send the message they wanted balance in government in some of these places, in both Senate and House races where you had split tickets. And there were a variety of younger Democrats who knew how to communicate with their voters via social media and come across in an authentic way. That's, I think, a huge lesson for Democrats in 26 and 28.
And that Democratic soul searching, of course, continues as we speak. Fascinating stuff, as always, from senior editor and elections analyst at The Cook Political Report with Amy Walter. Dave Wasserman. Dave, thank you very much.